Hi everyone, I am Chamika Wijesuriya from the Bandaranaike Centre for International Studies, Colombo, Sri Lanka. I am here today with Dr Ranil Senanayake to interview him on the topic of climate change adaptation through forestry and transition to renewable sources of energy. This is for the BCIS International Affairs Review Edition 1 on climate diplomacy. Dr Ranil Senanayake is a renowned ecologist who has years of experience working in pan-tropical forests. He is a prolific writer and activist on issues related to the environment and forests. He is the founder of Analog Forestry, which is a system of advanced silviculture, which is the art and science of controlling the structure, composition and the dynamics of forests. He has also made a distinction with regard to fossil and biotic energy and has highlighted how placing differentiated values on each allows us to expose our addicted economies and help developing countries avoid the pitfalls of the developed countries. We are fortunate to join Dr Senanayake in his own home in Beragala in Uva province of Sri Lanka. Dr Senanayake, could you throw some light on the main impacts of climate change that we should be worried about today?
Thank you very much for having me on, and thank you for your question, because it's very serious what's about to happen to us, and from many ways. One is that this vision or this perspective was voiced at COP21 by the presidential delegation to COP21. It was called the Sri Lanka country statement 5-6 years ago. Up to today, it has been ignored by the bureaucrats of our government who are supposed to go to the COP21 and advise us of the problems. It is ignored because the bureaucrats thought it didn't come from them. This is terrible. This is the attitude that has brought all these problems before us. Now let me demonstrate. With climate change, temperatures are going to go up. All over the world, temperatures are now summer temperatures are going over 40 degrees centigrade. Afghanistan, North India, North Africa, Australia, all have recorded temperatures over 40 degrees centigrade, and it's getting higher. What was pointed out by Sri Lanka at COP21 was the fact that chlorophyll, this green stuff that's in all our plants, chlorophyll, that produces our food. Chlorophyll is an enzyme, and chlorophyll operates most efficiently at between 38 to 39 degrees centigrade. That's the peak, after which it's an enzyme. It begins to denature. It begins to break apart. That is why when the temperature gets high, in countries that produce food, the food production goes down. If this is not addressed, there will not be the possibility of creating food in many parts of the world. Why are we ignoring this? It's a basic scientific fact. Yet, Sri Lanka, it's a Sri Lankan statement, but Sri Lanka has ignored it. The world is ignoring it. Why? So this is something that is critically important that I think we should consider. Second is, of course, with the rising of temperature comes the danger of fire, which will happen to us as well as the other countries. These are the issues that we should discuss and inquire into.
Thank you, Dr. Senanayake, for capturing the problem at hand very correctly. So, what should Sri Lanka's contribution be to these international climate regimes, especially the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change?
Well, first, if we are going to participate, we must be honest. We have not reported on the amount of concrete that we are using to create this new megapolis and all these structures, which is huge amounts of carbon dioxide. We haven't reported on that. We haven't reported on the fact that our agriculture is completely beholden to fossil carbon dioxide, because all the chemicals that we use in our agriculture, that these big problems have been about, is created by fossil fuel, by burning fossil fuel. Our agriculture creates fossil fuel, our construction creates fossil carbon dioxide. So we are not in a position to say anything to anybody, because we as a country are actually producing more and more fossil carbon dioxide and calling it development.
True. What do you think is preventing us from adhering to these recommendations of like low carbon development paths?
Corruption. Corruption at the level of the bureaucrats and the scientific community, who should be reporting on the reality of what's going on. Corruption on the part of the politicians, who see only construction and the consumption of fossil, where they get their 10 or 15% as development. Corruption is the root of it.
Yes, sir. Going back to the international climate regimes, do you think they are easily adaptable for developing countries like ours?
It depends on what you call development. If development is burning fossil fuel, I mean, you're a non-starter to begin with. And that is what the international system is telling us. Burn more fossil fuel and we are calling it development. They are forcing us down this track, because the dollar rests on, the value rests on oil, not on gold anymore. So the more oil we burn, the more valuable it becomes, the more we say it creates an economy. It is hollow, totally hollow economy.
So what you're saying is that the international system should restructure itself before like imposing these fossil restrictions on.
Yeah, what I'm saying is the international system should listen to their own scientists before trying to tell us what to do. The international system tells us what they want us to do in terms of economic development, not looking after the fundamental needs of the people, our food, clean water, clean air, freedom from poisons. Those are not considered. So that is why we are in the problem we are in. The international system has not considered us to be as valuable as they are, so they want us to destroy ourselves in creating this economy that supports their banks. Does it sound right to you?
Yes,
no.
It does. So, going back to the international climate regimes, do you think there are disparities or discriminations in the recommendations that they impose on developing countries as opposed to what they impose on developed countries?
Yes, because what are developed countries? They are countries that produce oil. They are responsible for all the damage that happens. But for them to make money on their oil, they have to get us to burn their oil, buy their oil and burn it. It's a deadly cycle. It's destroying the planet and nobody is calling it for what it is. And we, in the developing world, are the victims of the oil salesman and the fossil fuel salesman, who are continuing with the destruction of the planet and telling us, hey, participate, then we'll call you developed.
True. There are several climate justice movements happening around the world addressing this problem, because the developing countries are facing most of the burden of climate change impacts as opposed to the developed countries. Dr. Senanayake, do you have any recommendations for the international climate regimes on how they should support developing countries like ours?
First, they should allow the term development to be discussed, because development should mean what we want it to be. For instance, the founding father of this nation, D.S. Senanayake, had a vision of development. He said, the performance of my government or development of my country must be judged by the larder of the poorest of our homes. That is development. If we gauge how well we are by the larder of the poorest of our homes, if our poorest people in this country are doing well, we are all doing well. That is development. That is how we should look at it. Not how much GDP there is, not how much bank money the banks make, not how much constructions we have made. That's not development. But unfortunately, that is what we as a nation are looking at development, and not looking at ourselves and developing ourselves as to where we could be.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Now I would like to talk about a unique phenomenon that you yourself personally is promoting, the concept of analog forestry. Can you briefly tell us about this? What
Sure.
is analog forestry?
Of course. It started way back in the 1980s when I was in the Mahavali ministry as a consultant, and I was constantly fighting with the forest department as to what on earth are you doing planting monocultures of pinus and eucalyptus and teak? These are not forests. You know, these are just monoculture timber plantations, and yet you're calling it forest and using all the money we have for forestry, spending it on that. So I had a big fight with these guys, and they said, no, our experts are telling us this, and we went abroad and learned that. Obviously, they hadn't learned anything, so I was very angry. But as a consequence of fighting with the bureaucrats, what happened was I lost my job in the government. I was thrown out of government service, and they said, oh, he doesn't know anything. So I said, okay, I've been trained as a systems ecologist. If I'm criticizing something, I must be able to put my money where my mouth is. So I sold a property I had in Colombo, and I went around the country looking for abandoned land, because the forest department was telling me and telling everybody, there's nothing you can grow here, successfully except pinus and eucalyptus, monocultures. So I bought this land at Belipola and set up a process of doing research on how can I create something to fill in the gap of the lost forests that we have lost. And I figured by looking through the country that the best way that we can respond is to mimic the forest, to be analogous to the forest. When I go to a farmer and say, plant this tree, if I say, oh, this is the tree he just cut because it's of no use to him, he won't plant it. But if I say this is similar to that tree you planted, but you can get a crop from it, he will look after it. So that is what analog forestry is, using something analogous, similar to. So I create a forest similar to the original forest in architectural structure and ecological function, but my forest now feeds the farmer and his family. That's how analog forestry came about. It came about as a response for the forest department and the government foresters telling me that pinus and eucalyptus was the only way to go, and I said no, and I had to set up a model to demonstrate what I spoke about, and that is how analog forestry began. Today, the headquarters, the secretariat is in Costa Rica. 20 countries around the world are practicing analog forestry. My research center is up in Mirahawata near Bandaravela, and I have students from all over the world, Africa, South America, Asia, Europe, come in there to study analog forestry. Sadly, the only people who haven't come here for the last 36 years is anybody from the forest department or the wildlife department. That is Sri Lanka. That is why we are in the mess we are in.
Thank you, sir. That's a very interesting concept of symbiosis between people and forest that you have thought of and
we
created.
are a part of the environment. We are not separate from it. We have to recognize that and work with it. We have to work with nature. In Sri Lanka, when we look at the environment, we appreciate it as Subha Dharma. It's the dharma, it's the rules that created this thing that we see. With a knowledge like that, to act like we are acting now, for me is very sad.
So speaking about forestry, I would like to ask your opinion about the plan that the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation in Sri Lanka has proposed to increase the forest cover of Sri Lanka up to 30% by 2025.
Okay.
Do you think such a plan is practical and without stepping into controversy and disrupting the lives and livelihoods of people who are already living in certain areas?
You see, when they say they're going to increase the forests, how? What kind of forests? Are they going to plant pinus? Are they going to plant eucalyptus? Are they going to plant jack trees? What are they going to do? I mean, just to say we are going to make forests, that is a throwaway statement. It doesn't mean anything. What kind of forest are you going to make? Right? And where? So without answering those questions, right, to make a sort of offhand statement like that, it actually doesn't respect the public. It's just bureaucrats not respecting the public.
So what you're saying is the process has to be fully transparent to let everyone know where
Shouldn't it
and
be?
what they are planting.
Shouldn't government
Yes.
processes be transparent?
Sure.
Shouldn't we all participate in our country? Is our country left only for a few bureaucrats and a few politicians to handle? No. I'm totally opposed to that kind of government.
Yes, sir. True. So you have written about modern carbon cycle and global warming. In your opinion, will the current energy crisis that the world is facing move us towards the much needed transfer to renewable sources of energy? Renewable and clean sources of energy.
Correct. You see, the thing is, when we talk about carbon, we must understand that there are two cycles of carbon on this planet. The biotic cycle, you, me, the grass, the plants, everything that's living, we are made with carbon. But this carbon is called biological carbon. This circulates around the planet, takes about 4,000 years. I will die, my carbon will go into the grasses, into the plants, something else, and by the time it comes back, it'll be 4,000 years, but it cycles. And it's locked away for 4,000 years. That's biological carbon. And that is a limited amount on this planet. Now there's fossil carbon. Fossil carbon has been locked away for 200 million years. The carbon that comes from burning fossil carbon is not the same as the carbon you get from burning a piece of wood. The carbon in that piece of wood had a sequestration time maybe of 100 or 200 years. The carbon in the fossil has a sequestration time of 200 million years. Now, if we plant a tree or a plant and say, don't worry about this, that plant will soak up the carbon, okay, how long will that plant live for? 100 years, 200 years, 300 years? When that plant dies, where does the carbon go? Back into the atmosphere. It's not going into the soil to be locked up for 200 million years. So therefore, present carbon trading is what I call carbon laundering. It's like money laundering. They're laundering the fossil carbon into the biotic world and threatening all of existence through their sneaky accounting. So that is the huge danger that's before us when we speak about the carbon cycle. There's no recognition of the carbon cycle and the fact that fossil carbon does not ever belong in the biological carbon cycle, and it cannot be neutralized unless you can demonstrate that you can put it away for over at least 10 million years.
True, sir. It's a threat to our existence.
It's a total threat to our existence. Our children will not have a place to live if we greedily go on like this.
Dr. Senanayake, through the past decades, we have witnessed countries fighting over fossil fuels like oil and gas. Do you think the present day international hostilities and interstate wars are more towards securing clean energy sources now that the oil and the gas are depleting?
No, it's towards securing the dirty energy sources, the oil and the, that's what the wars are for. They don't fight wars over having solar power, right, or wind power. No, wars are fought about the resources that we know are destructive to the planet. And the wars themselves are fueled by what? By fossil carbon dioxide, by fossil energy. So when you fight a war, you not only fight a war with the enemy, another human being, you're fighting a war with the planet. You're fighting a war. When we fight wars, we destroy the planet, not just the enemy you're fighting with. That's the reality of today.
Yes. So lots of scholars have highlighted that climate change adaptation and sustainable development go hand in hand. Do you have any ideas to offer on?
Yes, if we get off fossil fuel, we could become more sustainable, of course. And sustainability, basically, sustainability is a measure. You measure how you are today, and you measure how you are tomorrow or the day after or the year after. Then you have a figure, and that will tell you whether your measure is positive or negative. If it's positive, you're sustainable. If it's negative, you're not. The slope of the measure, right, on a thing,
Yes.
if the slope is high, you're very sustainable. If the slope is a little sustainable, it's as simple as that. Sustainability is merely a measure of what you enjoy today, measured tomorrow to see whether you have the same thing. If you do, you're sustainable. If you don't, you're not.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for highlighting the dire situation we are in relation to climate change impacts, and going through all the details of the modern carbon cycle, and especially the concept of analog forestry and how it can be a solution to mitigate and adapt us to this climate change catastrophes, on behalf of the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies, I would like to sincerely offer my gratitude for extending your time and this valuable knowledge so that we can disseminate it to others who can use it for the good.
My pleasure, my dear. My pleasure. I'm very glad to talk to you on this subject. I think it's a subject that requires not only my voice, it requires you to go around and ask other people as to how many people around are aware of the real problem. Because our job when we talk to people is to sensitize others to what we know and then leave it to them to make up their mind what they want to do. But as communicators, you as a communicator, me as a researcher, our job is to communicate what we have found with the public at large and let them then decide. That is democracy, and I'm glad you're participating. and I'm happy to participate with you.
Thank you, sir.
Of course.